Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we have a good hard look at the neighbor to the north, Lebanon. Israel and Lebanon now returning to the negotiating table with regards to their maritime border talks over oil drilling rights that have largely stalled under the political instability and terror group Hezbollah's influence. But talks are set to restart nonetheless. The problem is that this is far from Lebanon's only issue. Among the myriad issues, the country long facing the barrel end of an economic crisis, government corruption, Hezbollah terrorism, and now the coronavirus pandemic. So what will it take to stabilize the country, and can progress beyond simple stabilization in the region be in the cards? Joining us to discuss is ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan and research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC Herzliya and former senior staff member in the U.S. Congress, Dr. Fadi Ismail. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I'm very excited about this. Now let's start actually with the maritime border, though. And Fadi, how do you see the future of the maritime border dispute? Because there is a new U.S. mediator, Amos Hochstein, and there's some positivity, some buzz around these new talks.
There's always buzz around these talks. Mr. Hochstein is not that new. I mean, we know him. He's a very he is a very well-versed person. He knows this. He knows all the actors and everything. Look, the issue of a maritime border between those two countries, in principle, technically speaking, is very easy to solve. Very, very easy to solve. I mean, and it has been solved by experts. There are very clear ways how you can tell the maritime borders between neighboring countries. There's nothing mystical about this. It's just whether the other side, say the Lebanese so-called government, and there is really no Lebanese government, if they are willing to accept what the entire world accepts, there's nothing really special to that, or they're going to use it as like a tool to create trouble. And when I say, again, Lebanese government, we know exactly today who runs that government, who that is. The issue is at all not with drawing that border. There are borders all over the world between countries that are neighboring, that share the same shoreline. There's no issue with that. We know how to do that. There is a new method on how it's done. I'm not going to go into technicalities, but I used to work many years in California. We had a border with Mexico. We had a border then further north on the western seaboard with Canada. It's easy to do, and it was already done. So the issue is not the maritime sea.
Whether
Hezbollah, whether Iran would let the Lebanese say, okay, there it is. Remind you that for many years, Gibran Bassil was the minister in charge of that. I think he still is. Under all kinds of, once he was Minister of Energy, and he became a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then he is basically a pawn for those groups. So if he is told to sign it, he will. But no one among officials, professionals in the field, no one sees the challenge there. So it's purely a question whether the Iranians want to lower the level of tension between so-called Lebanon and Israel, or whether they want to keep the tension high. It's the same issue like
I think we know.
It's like when I was finished with that, it's like the land border between Israel and Lebanon. There is no, the United Nations was there. They are the ones who drew the borders. There is no debate about this, and still we have very high tensions with Hezbollah, while they have absolutely no claims. They couldn't possibly have claims there. So the issue is political. It's not technical. All
right, so I want to move on to you, Asaf. Why? Of course, we know why. In principle, the United States would have such high hopes of mediating these talks. But practically speaking, why is the United States involved in this? Israel and Lebanon arguably could reach a conclusion themselves.
I mean, they could, and of course, one of the options that is held on the table, in my opinion, in addition to what Fadi said, is also the option that the Iranians maybe will try to hold it, or I don't know if maybe the Lebanese government will reach, in some potential, a hope of recovering its own independence, deciding, yeah, we prefer to agree to this border as long as we can finally get some gas and help our economy. I mean, this is an issue that's going to be pressing more than anything else, and I think that what we call government right now in Lebanon should handle that. But I think because of the fact that, like Fadi said, there isn't really a government in Lebanon and they're not really governing themselves properly, I think maybe there is a need for a U.S. intervention here. Again, I don't know if it's 100% needed because we know that they tried to restart the negotiations recently. But then again, maybe they still need the U.S. supervision there.
I mean, it seems to me that the United States, on the one hand, could be a positive force for mediation in these talks, but on the other hand, might be antagonistic to Iran, especially given the current climate between them and Vienna. So is it a force for good or a force for bad in these talks?
International relations are not about good or bad or emotions or feelings or support or lack of support. It's about interests. If the Iranians decide that it's in their interest to lower the tensions on Israel's northern border, whether it's in Maritime, whether it's with Lebanon, or whether it's the borders with the Golan Heights, let's not forget, they're also amassing along the Golan Heights. So their entire direction, especially with the new president, is to increase the heat. Under that kind of superimposing goal, why would they? And they couldn't care less. They could care less about the Lebanese people. You know, the Lebanese people have reached a place where they can't even buy formula for the babies, and nobody cared. I mean, even the water was cut off at one point. So the Iranians don't care about this stuff.
So actually, Fadi brings up a great point where let's move on maybe to the economic crisis. Roughly 78% of the Lebanese population is now in poverty. The currency falling by roughly 90% in a couple of years. Vital medicines running out. Lebanon's most qualified are leaving. There's a brain drain. And of course, food costs have skyrocketed by almost 600% in 2 years. What is Lebanon doing to address these issues?
I mean, they're trying to get donations from wherever they can. They've been pleading. France, of course, has
donations don't.
I mean, not only that. Let's be honest. Of course, there were programs built on the table. I mean, France has offered aid. I know we all know that Iran is actively helping Lebanon. I mean, starting with the gas, of course, and I believe it's only a matter of time they'll try to involve themselves in other options. I know that there was a plan, by the way. Speaking of the gas, there was a plan also. Originally, the U.S. was trying with Egypt and Jordan to provide gas to Lebanon, but then again, it opens the question to why Lebanon decided to agree to take the gas from Iran. But overall, I think Lebanon is, again, because it's still in kind of a shambles, it's really been struggling to find a way to appropriately start collecting funds and trying to rebuild itself.
By taking gas from Iran, has Lebanon opened itself up to United States sanctions?
That's a potential good question.
Legally speaking, it depends who reads. Laws are something that is written, and then you have to decide. Somebody has to decide how you try them, how you go about implementing. Or I find it hard to believe that the Biden administration, or really any American administration, will now hold that against. Look, there is no Lebanon. I mean, we say Lebanon. There's a country named Lebanon. Very unique country. It is very distinct from the countries around it. It has its own culture, its own history, its own everything. But in terms of government, they don't really exist. And I believe that from speaking with many Lebanese friends that I've known in the U.S. and I'm still in contact with them, I think the crisis is deeper than people think. They honestly don't believe the entire political class. I mean, sometimes in Israel, we complain about these politicians and those politicians, but in the end, it's nothing. They are really in complete distrust to anybody who has ever been in their own government, to the extent that maybe it's too much even. As far as how do they survive, they keep on sending money back home. I mean, even if you send $100 a month to a family in Beirut or Sur or Saida or any place like this, it means a lot in Lebanon. Actually, it's a weird situation where the Syrian refugees are today in better situation in Lebanon than the Lebanese people are, because they're receiving the help from the agencies, $100, $150 a month. And that is worth a lot in today's Lebanon. And while the Lebanese people itself, they don't have that. They're not considered refugees. So they're reliant a lot on their relatives over in other countries, whether it's Europe or the United States, or Latin America. There are many Lebanese in Latin America and so on. As far as the brain drain, you are absolutely right. I've met so many of the Lebanese in the U.S. They are really, really talented, educated population. I can imagine if these people were back in Lebanon and building it up, it would have been. Would
they be in a position if they today said, "I'm hopping on a plane, I'm going back to Lebanon"?
You know why they can't?
Position to do it?
You know why they can't do it? They can't. Of course, they can hop on a plane and go. But once, as some guy explained to me, who was a businessman in Los Angeles, told me, "Let's say I'm going there," because I asked him, "Why don't you do that? Why are you building a business in the U.S. rather than your own home country?" He said, "It's very simple. They won't let me. because it's like a feudal system. Yeah, you can try and open something in Beirut. That's the most you can do. But if you want to go to the more peripheral areas where they really need it, there are all these local big families, wealthy feudal families that we know. Then we know the names because they have people in parliament here or there. And he says you can't even open a kiosk without that master saying okay. And they won't let you do because they don't. That's what he says. He said, and I heard it from several people, they want to keep the control over all the economy of the region.
Even today, there's maybe like a black market or a subversion of some sort.
Obviously, there's a black market in those places.
Of course, yes. But if you open a shop, that's not a black market.
It's a sanctioned black market. Let's call it that, pretty much.
Yeah.
And besides, I would probably argue also the fact that I think those who are running out of Lebanon are specifically also from different factions. Again, they might be brilliant, might potentially want to invest, but that faction again isn't the strongest now in Lebanon. And of course, they have the show of force. So again, if let's say someone Maronite would want to probably take stuff forward, I don't know how much support he would get.
Let me give you a specific example. The Shuf Mountains in Lebanon have some of the most beautiful views in the world. They're as beautiful as Switzerland, if not even more beautiful. If you start any kind of touristic attraction there, at one time they were actually being called Little Switzerland, or Switzerland of the Middle East. That was the name of Lebanon. So it makes it, if you are like a millionaire who can drop a few $millions there, and there are many Lebanese, trust me, in the world with way more than a few millions, and you want to build some casino there, or something like a hotel, like an Antalya kind of thing, you will, like this, make the money coming back. Everybody will come. The thing is this, there is a feudal master there. You build something like this, you become a major employer. You become a high-profile person. You are now messing with that guy's base.
So you got to pay protection probably, or some other.
It's also seeking the attention, seeking the control, being the only one on the. It's a big deal. It's frustrating.
So we've gone through multiple change-ups in the Lebanese government just in the last year. We have now, of course, this Pandora Papers, which have. Even broken the trust, whatever there was left, with the politicians, even more so. And according to the new Pandora Papers, actually, many politicians, including new Prime Minister of Lebanon, have been implicated in siphoning off huge amounts of money from Lebanon, while simultaneously condemning such corruption. Is Lebanon on the verge of another political shakeup? Might we have, a civil war even? I'll take this one.
Well, in my opinion, it could shake up again to another protest. I don't know if civil war, because, again, it's not back to 75 or 80 or to 75 where it literally got to the point where it went to civil war. This is more of a non-faction entire economical crisis for the country. So speaking of which, it doesn't matter from which faction you come. It won't cause civil war as much as a protest from the people themselves. Towards the government, and of course they don't trust them anyway.
But we've seen in other countries an Arab Spring of sorts that has successfully overturned or at least formed some.
What I'm worried about is this: there's something that it happens in Lebanon that is very worrisome to the old political class. There's unity in the people, and there's a famous saying that they say in Lebanese accent of Arabic, "Killun yani killun," which in Lebanese Arabic means all of them, meaning all of them. So they're not giving the street, the Lebanese street, with all of its religions and ethnicities and races and all that. It's a very diverse street. Is not buying. They say throw them all, regardless. But
that's which provides hope really for.
But on the other hand, it weakens the political elite, which holds all the cards. Would anybody there try to light the switch of ethnic warfare or religious war again there? Would they be able? Well, look, yes. Because you know how easy it is, and we know how easy we can in this country like this. I can go now up. Anybody go up into, let's say, to the Temple Mount, do a few provocations, you have a war. So really, it happened a few months ago. Yeah. It is very easy to do. So imagine in Lebanon, which is a cinder box, every bit as we have it here, and even more. Are they going to be able, those politicians, if somebody really goes crazy and decide, let's light this switch underneath the whole story. Now, I'll tell you what makes it a little hopeful, and we're going to sound crazy. The fact that Hezbollah is so much in control now. Sounds crazy,
yeah,
right?
no, we're silent. I don't know.
I say crazy because what interest do they have to light that switch? You see what I'm...
Not? Do they not have any? Well, if
No,
I imagine it,
they're in
I'm
control.
putting myself in.
They're in control. If it now everything breaks in the streets again, and they start shooting at each other, the system that they control so well will fall to pieces.
I think it's already falling to pieces. I mean, there were protests already against Hezbollah and calling out
Protest
for them.
is one thing, but actually, he was asking about the civil war.
So even if there were, a civil war or a conflict on the streets, it could. I'm thinking, ulterior here. It could provide Hezbollah with an opportunity.
They have the opportunity to control. They're already dividing and conquering.
But they do still have some opposition. They do have.
Now, here's the deal. Are they going? Well, that's the question. Do they feel? Here's again. The more safe they feel, the safer they feel in their own position, the chances they will try and light the switch will be less. The problem is this: there are others, and they see Hezbollah getting so comfortable, they might try and light that switch. So it is really a complicated game. What is blocking it so far is because there was some violence during the protest.
Of course.
But the people themselves, the people in the street, of all religions, Sunnis, Maronites, Catholics, Druze, Shiites, everybody just didn't buy into it. They say, go away. How long will that hold? I hope forever, because that country deserves some breathing space. They have been at this war by no fault of their own since the mid-70s. That was started at the time with the Palestinian-Syrian thing. And they have been into it for like 40 years now. I think they deserve some time, to build themselves up. But again, you have to understand, Lebanon is more like a board chessboard, a 3D chessboard where many forces from outside Lebanon are playing, including Israel. And I don't know what to. I hope that this spirit they have in the people would continue.
So I want to ask actually about more about some of the grassroots movements, and I'll start with you, Asaf. In Iraq, not long ago, there was a conference of many heads of, not necessarily heads of states, but big names, public figures and public officials, influencers, et cetera. And they called for normalization with Israel, claiming that some 90% of Iraqis actually support such a move. Is there any sort of notable grassroots movement like that in Lebanon?
Personally, I don't know of which, and especially, Israel has been to Lebanon in the past. I think pretty much the Lebanese are a bit scarred from the Israeli presence. Again, I'm not sure. I didn't see personally any grass movements there. I know there's been a lot of grassroots movement, to remove the current government, finally something normal, of course. But with Israel, I haven't seen anything yet pop up pretty much.
The hate towards whatever they believe Israel is like the only thing that they can agree on. But they don't really hate Israel. You know what I mean? When I talk to them, they never come off as hateful. Actually, when you see them in LA, you see them in Florida, you see them in Miami, you see them in New York, they're buddies with the Israelis there. There's no
animosity.
It's not animosity really, but it's like something. It's like the concept of Israel as a force that invaded. Look, Syria invaded Lebanon and caused way much more damage than Israel could ever cause. So when you sit with them, talk to them one-on-one, you don't see much. They're like very business-like. They're really, believe it or not, Lebanese are people who really like to party. They're famous in the Middle East for that. Sure. All the best singers, all the best parties, all the best movies, they make everything.
Look at one of the protests. They even literally did a party there.
Yeah, it was a party. It was actually, that's their attitude to life. They're very curious about Israel. Once they get past that. Now, it also depends on the age. The people who ran away from the war in the 80s, they still hold, like during the Israeli invasion there, they still have that, the 70s, 80s.
It's understandable.
Yeah. Which I get, no issue. But they're also very interested to know that inside Israel there were very heavy protests against that war. And that kind of confuses them.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to that. And then, but when you start getting a little younger, all of a sudden you hear different attitudes. They want to know, they want to hear. They will bring out some of the things that are, and then it comes.
Well, because it's like you say, I think that it's pretty disarming to find that if you ask the average Israeli today that if tomorrow a deal were on the table for normalization with Lebanon, I can't think of anyone who would agree with it.
They will already buy the ticket to drive to Beirut to party.
Absolutely. I think
it's like
that has to be pretty disarming to the average Lebanese citizen.
yeah, but where do they see that?
Right.
See what I'm saying? Where do they meet? That's a problem with the Arab media. And by the way, I'm going to say something here which is really radical. Also in Israeli media, we don't see this a lot because there are many voices in the Arab world. We do hear them, those positive, or let's say, you can call it anything you want, the peaceful voices. We start hearing them after we sign some agreement with their country. All of a sudden, you discover there are thousands of those from the get-go. Just a few days, in a couple of days, I will be through my company, will be hosting a group of Bahrainis. Who knew until a year and a half ago that so many people in Bahrain were so curious about Israel and want to know what's going on, or about the UAE? Or I can tell you there are people like this in Algeria, believe it or not. There are people like this in Libya, for sure. There are people like this in Sudan. I'm telling you from personal knowledge. And some other countries maybe we shouldn't talk about. So we also don't cover that so much. You see what I'm saying? So, and that's understandable. In the end, people are people. Even when they're angry, you put them with each other, they start talking, and all of a sudden things start melting.
I think it's just a fear, pretty much. I mean,
of course.
It's true. A lot of them, in the end of the day, Fadi's right. A lot of them did pop up suddenly afterwards. Some of them were brave enough to talk against the government, against the regimes, and pro-Israel relations before they allowed it. And some of them, for example, in Iraq, speaking of, they were arrested. But a lot of those voices, I guess, do exist also in Lebanon. But yet again, because we're talking about a country controlled by Hezbollah, they're scared out of their mind to talk about it.
You mentioned Iraq, which is a country that I have a soft spot for many reasons. I have to say the name, Mithal al-Alusi. You know who he is, I believe. Member of Parliament in Iraq. He visited Israel a few years back. As a punishment, they killed 2 of his boys. And while mourning them, he comes out to the cameras and saying, next year I'm traveling again to Israel, which he did. And I had one of the highest honors of my life, meeting this guy, both in Tel Aviv, but also once in Greece, and I had the long sit down with him. I believe he deserves a Nobel Prize for peace. How many parliamentarians in any country in the world would have been willing to go through that? And he did it in Iraq. Just think about this. And he came back again, and he kept on communicating, and he was re-elected into parliament with a higher margin.
So that gives a little bit of credence to some of those.
It tells us something. It tells us something.
All right. Well, I think those are the voices that we actually absolutely need to uplift. I agree with you there. Dr. Fadi Ismail, Asaf Nissan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Aaron Porras, and please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and ILTV.tv channels. Thank you so much. Be well. We'll see you soon.